Hello again.
Good morning.
You need a copy of the handout. I keep seeing old friends. You'll need a copy of the handout. Has everybody got a handout, or shall I bring some towards the back? Good. First of all, I wonder if you remembered to do your pitch practice that I told you to do. We were looking at representations like these yesterday, and I suggested that you needed to develop the skill to make a low pitch when you want to, and a high pitch when you want to, and a mid pitch. I wonder if you can turn to whoever is next to you and do your version of the syllable ma on first a low pitch, then a mid pitch, then a high pitch. So I want 3 ma's going low, mid, high, and make sure your neighbor agrees with you. Try it now. Ma, 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 ma. You need to use a realistic range of pitch. I won't be happy. I will not be happy with ma, ma, ma. Nobody speaks like that. So you need a high that is high but just a bit higher, and a low that's low but just a bit lower. Try it the other way round. Can you go high, mid, low? Right. Okay, now, how about 2 highs followed by a low? Yes. Ma, ma, ma. And now, high, then low, then mid. Yes. Ma, ma, ma. And now can you join those 3 pitches together on a single ma that's stretched out to go through the 3 pitches? Yes. It'll be ma, ma. From this, I detect that you need a little more practice. Still, there is always tomorrow. I was asked one question a few times over, a frequent question after the lecture yesterday, which I should have explained in the lecture, I guess, and it was to do with these 2 patterns we were looking at. The question is, how do they differ in meaning? Why have I got 2 patterns? And the answer to that question is they don't necessarily differ very much in meaning at all. They certainly don't differ in the importance of the information. There's not a great focus or background difference between them. The main difference between these 2 patterns is in the pitch termination here. So the first one had a falling pitch there, giving I don't remember his telephone number. This one has a rise, giving I don't remember his telephone number. This difference in pitch here is another matter. It's an incidental thing. This part could be the same as there. We have many choices in intonation, and it isn't always the case that everything means clearly something different. But they would be suitable for different contexts. For example, this one with a rise at the end is suitable to be followed by something else, such as, I don't remember his telephone number, but I can remember his address. So it's not a big difference in meaning, just that it's more suitable to be the first of 2 linked intonation groups like that. Okay, well today again I have a list of things that I'm hoping to cover, and they're listed on your handout as well as on the slide. Again, by the end of today, I'd like to think you understand these concepts and could make an attempt to explain them, write down or explain the definition of them, and give some English examples. The first thing I have to talk about is stress in words. I was using the word stress yesterday, or stress, to mean a certain level of prominence in speech, a suprasegmental feature, a certain degree of prominence that makes syllables beats in rhythms. But of course, the word stress is used another way. We talk about the stressed syllable of a word. The stressed syllable of a word probably will be stressed in the sense I was using yesterday, when the word is incorporated into speech. In fact, commonly, it will be more than stressed. It will be accented. What we have in English is that in every word of 2 syllables or more, 1 syllable is stressed. So we don't talk about stressing 1-syllable words. If you look in most dictionaries, look up the word dog. It's written with a full vowel and it has no stress mark. This doesn't mean that we don't stress the word dog. It just means it's pointless to put in the stress mark because there's nothing to compare that syllable with. That's true of some dictionaries. Others do mark stress on monosyllables. My copy of Webster's dictionary, an American College dictionary, does mark stresses on monosyllables as well as on words of 2 or more syllables. I guess in a big dictionary you save lots of little marks, which it may be worth doing if you're trying to squash a lot in. Anyway, the important thing is words of 2 syllables or more, 1 syllable will be stressed. And we show stress by means of a stress mark, which is a raised vertical mark, a raised vertical tick, which is put in front of the stressed syllable, including any consonants which are at the beginning of that syllable. So here we have the English word pillow, where you put your head when you go to sleep, pillow. There's the stress mark. In front of the P tells us that the first syllable of pillow is the stress mark. There's another kind of stress mark which you see commonly in dictionaries and grammar books, which consists of an acute accent, which is placed over the vowel itself. It means the same thing, but it has the disadvantage that it doesn't help you find where the syllables begin and end. So one advantage of the IPA stress mark, this one, is that it does show syllable division, as it does here. In the word below, which is stressed on the 2nd syllable, stress mark tells us the 2nd syllable is stressed, but the mark is put in front of the L. And native speakers, I think, feel that the L is in the 2nd syllable, not at the end of the 1st. When we take any word like this and pronounce it on its own, we'll make the word into an intonation group, and it will have a nucleus. So if I just say a 2-syllable word like pillow, for example, water is on your handout, the syllable that's shown as stressed in the dictionary moves up that scale of prominence. It's accented and it's made nuclear because we're saying the word as a whole, complete utterance. We say pillow, water. I'm putting a falling nucleus on the syllable. If we take a word of several syllables like tomorrow, tomorrow is stressed on the 2nd syllable, hence when I say tomorrow as a complete utterance, the 1st syllable of tomorrow is the prehead. There is no head because there's no accent before the nucleus. The 2nd syllable of tomorrow is the nucleus syllable, tomorrow, and the last one is the tail. You see what this means? When we talk about words in isolation, when we compare words and speak them aloud, reading them from the dictionary, we're never really talking about stress at all. We're actually talking about accents. We're talking about pitch accents, nuclear accents. This is probably the source of some of the confusion. People think that stress is what they hear when they say words aloud. But really stress is just the potential for that accent. It's a place where it could happen, provided the word is used in the right place and receives an accent at all. This doesn't conflict with the scale of prominence I gave you yesterday. The syllable is stressed without pitch accent in that scale. The stressed syllable is ready to receive accent. It is a syllable which may receive accent. And the same thing is true in a word. The stressed syllable can receive accent. Now, how do we know which syllable in a word is stressed? The answer for English is you look it up in a dictionary. It's not hard to find out which syllable is stressed. Look it up in any dictionary and it will tell you. I think you should make frequent use of a dictionary that shows pronunciations. We all should. And one of the most important uses of dictionaries for learners is to indicate where stress comes in words. The people who compile dictionaries go to a lot of trouble to work out how best to indicate stress, the most helpful way of showing stress. And there are a few surprises in stress. You shouldn't guess necessarily. Look it up and learn the stress with the word. You probably know that there are languages where the stress position in the word is sort of fixed. If you know where the word starts and finishes, you know where the stress is. Some examples here. Czech is a language that has stress on the first syllable in a word. Welsh is an example of a language which has stress on what is called the penultimate syllable, the next to last syllable. Polish is like Welsh, it puts stress on the next to last syllable. But English, unfortunately, doesn't have a single rule like that. It doesn't mean that there are no rules. There are all kinds of regularities in the placement of English stress, but they're very complicated to remember, and for the most part you're better off learning the stress, looking it up in a dictionary. When you do look up words in a dictionary, you may find that more than one kind of stress is indicated. You can have primary and secondary stress. So, for instance, here are two words as they might appear in a pronouncing dictionary. Concentration, concentration. As I've represented it there, it has 4 syllables. 2 of them are weak and have syllabic consonants in them. Concentration. The third syllable is marked with the stress mark we've already discussed, and that's the main stress, or primary stress in the word. But there's another place marked there with a lowered mark. It's unsurprising that that means a lower kind of stress, a secondary stress. The point is that both of these can receive accent. When you say the word in isolation, what you do is put a pre-nuclear accent on the first of them and a nuclear accent on the last, and say concentration, concentration. If I don't put an accent on the first one, it sounds a bit strange. Concentration, concentration. Of course, that pronunciation with only one accent could certainly be found in running speech. But when I want to say the word on its own, it seems most natural to use 2 accents. One on the secondary stress, one on the primary. So our rule that stress marks show potential accents is true for both secondary and primary stress. Here's a word, a much longer word, which has more than one secondary stress. It's not common, but if the word is long enough, there can be a chain of syllables before we come to the primary stress, and we may feel several beats in the rhythm leading up to the primary. So, indivisibility, indivisibility. The first of those is stronger. That receives an accent when we say the word in isolation. The second secondary stress could receive an accent, because that's voice voiceless, so the fundamental frequency switch is off. Written, you can see that the first syllable is on a high pitch and begins to fall. Second syllable is on a low pitch. This is because a nuclear accent has been put on the first syllable, written. Written. But in the word return, which consists essentially of the same segmental material, it's the second syllable, which is the stressed syllable, and it's the second syllable which has received the accent. This fall here is pretty much like the fall there, and it's been moved along so that it happens on the second syllable. And the first syllable there is being said on a low pitch. It's now a pre-head in a pattern that goes pre-head, return. Of course, this is again what happens when we say the words in isolation. When we incorporate words into sentences, they won't necessarily have such clear pitch accents on them. There are a fair number of pairs of words in English which differ by stress position. All introductory books on English phonetics give you a list of them. We have, for instance, the verb import. No, not the verb, the noun import, and the verb import. To import something, the verb is stressed on the second syllable, and the things you import are imports, and stressed on the first syllable. You don't have any choice about that. It's got to be like that. You must follow that pattern. Not every related noun and verb in that way uses the same pattern. Unfortunately, there are exceptions even there. But it's a kind of minor regularity in English. There's often a relationship between a noun and a verb. There's a particularly good relationship between what happens in phrasal verbs and the corresponding phrasal nouns. So, for instance, we have a verb to take off. An aeroplane takes off. Off has the main stress. Off is the primary stress in take off. But the noun is take off, stressed on the first element, take off. To pay out is a phrasal verb accented on out. To pay out, a noun is accented on pay. You know many of these. But the stress pattern in words is more important, is actually more important than the number of contrasts would lead you to think. You'd think that the stress comes in handy, the stress is used when there is an ambiguity. Is it the noun, is it the verb? I listen to the stress and that will tell me which one it is. But the fact is that even when there aren't two words which are the same or very similar and distinguished only by stress, if you don't use the right stress, the listener will be completely perplexed. They won't guess what word you mean. Last week, I spent a second or two processing what somebody said to me. She said, I finished my exam. What? I finished my exam. Now, there isn't a word exam. There's only a word exam. Exam, examination, exam. So you'd think that as there is no word exam, I would have no trouble in finding out what she meant. But once you've heard the stress, you start consulting your mental dictionary and you're looking for a word that is stressed in the way you heard. So there I was searching my dictionary for some word that went da-da, da-da, stressed on the first syllable. Couldn't find it. Went round and round and round. Then finally figured out that she meant exam. Exam. What about, I need to talk to my landlady. I need to talk to my landlady. What does that mean? There's the word landlady, but once we've heard landlady, we can't find the word at all. The vowels and consonants may be pronounced perfectly well, but we're stuck. You've heard lots of stories, I'm sure, like this, which go back in history about tourists who arrived in London, got into a cab and asked to go somewhere, and were taken to entirely the wrong place because they made a stress mistake. You know there's a place called Camden Town. Camden Town. Now, all names like that, something town, will have stress on the town. Camden Town, Canning Town, and so on. This visitor got into a cab and asked to go to Camden Town, putting the stress on the first element, Camden Town. And I don't think the taxi driver was being unhelpful, but he took the person to Kennington, which is in another part of London altogether, in South London. Kennington. Why? Because it has the same stress pattern as what was heard. And it has some of the same consonants. So it's not only stress contrasts that you have to get right, you have to get the stress right in order to facilitate comprehension at all. Because I think that our speech perception process pays a lot of attention to stress in locating the words in our dictionaries. There's some remarks about compound words at the bottom of the first page of your handout. Although for simple words the best thing is to look up the stress pattern in a dictionary and to learn it, it's very important to know that in compounds, which are extremely frequent in English, of course you know, usually the first element of the compound carries the stress. There are some examples there: landlady, penknife, teaspoon, sunglasses. If you pronounce those with the wrong stress pattern, they are virtually incomprehensible. Sunglasses. That would probably be interpreted as some glasses. I need sunglasses. Oh, there are some in the cupboard in the kitchen. Teaspoon, I have no idea. It might be misunderstood as typhoon or something. So whenever we have a compound is just a word made up of other words, two words stuck together. Usually you stress the first element of the compound. So radio is a word, program is a word, radio program, stressed on the radio is a compound. Motor is a word, cycle is a word, motorcycle, stressed on the motor. In the first element of the compound, the stress goes obviously on the syllable in that word that is stressed in the dictionary, not on the very first. So for instance, computer isn't a compound. Computer, stressed on the second syllable, but computer game, stressed on the first element of the compound, and within that, on the stressed syllable, computer. You can make up compounds all the time. I have no idea how many compounds are invented every day in English, but just go on and on and on. Basically, you just take any two things, stick them together, say them this way, and it's a compound. Chewing gum, beer bottle. Chewing gum packet collector, and so on. You can go on and on making bigger compounds. And you should practice doing it. Of course, there are a few compounds which don't work that way. You find a note of them in books on English phonetics. If the second word is very general, for instance, we get different patterns. Apple pie is a compound kind of pie. We can't in Britain at least say apple pie. We have to say apple pie. Why? Because apple is a constituent of pie. So there are a few things like that, but on the whole, your best bet is to put the stress on the first element of the compound. Now I want to say a little bit more about rhythm. We were talking about rhythm yesterday, and I had you looking at limericks and nursery rhymes as simple poetry with strong rhythms. And you've probably come across the claim that English has a kind of rhythm, it's often called stress times rhythm. It's said that the stresses mark out the rhythm, and there's meant to be equal times from one beat to another rhythm. This is to contrast English with other languages. For example, French is the classic example, where you don't seem to get this. It seems as if all the syllables are pretty important, and the rhythm, the impression of the rhythm is different. If you believed in this theory, then you'd think it would be a good idea to practice very rhythmic example proving, like nursery rhymes and simple poetry. I don't think any harm can come from doing that. But unfortunately, the theory of equal times between stresses is not true. Even when we say very simple verse like a nursery rhyme and try to make it as rhythmic as possible, it turns out that the intervals between the stresses vary quite a bit. This is me saying, Mary had a little lamb. This is a spectrogram. And these are the words, Mary had a little lamb. Frequency in the signal here and time going along here. I wasn't just saying, Mary had a little lamb, I was clapping at the same time. So I was putting a clap on each stress. Mary had a little lamb. The kind of thing where it seems to the listener that the stresses are equally spaced out. It's probably just about as rhythmic an utterance as you can get. But I'm sure you can see that this interval here, these black lines going up are the claps, by the way. That one is clearly shorter than that one. Obviously it's about 10 or 15% shorter. So when you start measuring them, in reality, they're not the same. Another interesting thing about this clapping is where I'm clapping. That little smudge there is the beginning of the M for Mary, but the clap is coming there where the vowel starts. So although I was clapping along with Mary, my hands actually did the clap at the moment when I started the vowel. Mare, mare, Mary. If I try and do it the other way, Mary, Mary. I'm trying to get the clap at the beginning of the consonant. Mary, Mary. The other way is Mary. Yeah. The other claps are also not at the beginning of the syllables, but at the vowel onsets. The L for lamb is there, and that mark is the beginning of the vowel. It's astonishing how accurately the claps line up with the beginning of the vowel in the syllables. So, yes, we can do very rhythmic bits of English. We can practice them. It's a good idea to know some nursery rhymes and simple poetry and to practice it. But whether it will make your rhythm right, I don't know. It probably won't. It may help. One thing I can say is I've never met a learner of English whose speech was too rhythmic. So I've never met somebody who had learned so many nursery rhymes that their speech was far too rhythmic. It's usually the opposite, that it isn't sufficiently rhythmic. So talkers don't plan their ordinary conversation to have perfect rhythm like nursery rhymes. You find they break up the rhythm by pausing and hesitating, we do keep on hearing very rhythmic bits. Often you'll hear 2 or 3 stresses in speech as it goes past. And you think, oh yes, there's a piece of regular rhythm going on, and then it breaks up again. In what I just said, there were some bits like that. I was saying ordinary conversation, 2 strong stresses in that phrase, and then there are the weak syllables, ordinary conversation. There are some perhaps more realistic ways in which we can practice rhythm, and I'll come to those in just a moment. The story then about isochrony, equal time between stresses, isn't true exactly. It's an impression we get. Probably it mainly comes from the fact that the syllables in spoken English are very unequal. I explained yesterday about the hierarchy of prominence. We keep hearing a stronger syllable, then a weaker one, and another strong one, and some weak ones. And once we hear a sequence of events with different kinds of thing recurring in it, then we sort of imagine a rhythm. We hear a rhythm in it. It's like listening to anything that's repeating. You listen to a clock ticking, and you can convince yourself it's ticking in 2s or 4s or 3s. Or you listen to a tap dripping, and you can hear it in was time or in for time and so on, just according to how you appreciate these. But there is one effect in English which does have the tendency to produce equal time between stresses. It's on the second page of your handout, rhythmic clipping. It's also known as foot level shortening or isochronizing clipping. Some people know this phenomenon by the name of the borrowing rule. What happens is that if you get a strong syllable, a syllable containing one of the strong vowels or diphthongs, and that's followed not by another strong syllable, but by some weak syllables, then the duration of the strong syllable, under these circumstances, is noticeably less. One of the examples on your handout is man. Take man, and then you've got manage, and manager. The man bit in manager is audibly shorter than the man bit on its own. Man, manager. If I don't do that, if I keep man as long as it is on its own and then fit on the other syllables, I get a strange pronunciation. Manager, manager, manager. This should be manager, because of the effect of the weak syllables on the strong syllables. The same thing happens here. Play has a certain duration. In playful, the play is shortened. Playfulness is shortened again. We don't say playfulness, but playfulness. Now you can see that as sequences like this occur in speech, they'll have the effect of tending to make the intervals between stresses a bit more equal. Instead of being as long as it takes to get in X number of syllables, some squashing is going on. The strong vowels are being shortened a bit to help the rhythm along. So it's worth practicing sequences of words like this. And it doesn't have to be part of the same word. A weak syllable following that's a different word has exactly the same effect. So, in fact, I think the identity of words is pretty much lost in English speech. We don't care where the syllables come from, we just perform them. There's nothing marking the beginnings and ends of words as such. Probably the thing that's most likely to improve one's rhythm is getting weak forms right. You all know about weak forms. If not, you can read about them at great length in any of the books you have, or look them up in the dictionaries you have. Many of the most common function words, that is the grammatical words or form words in English, occur most usually in so-called weak forms with a schwa. So all of the ones I've listed here, you can generally perform with a schwa. We don't say at, but ut. We don't say of, we say We don't say the, we say the, and so on. As you listen to native speakers, you hear many, many words, many more words being pronounced as weak forms. But the least you can do is to take the commonest ones, the ones listed here, and try and use a schwa every time, and to make them short. There is a little bit of detail to this, but the point about this is to show you that if you don't use weak forms, you may easily be misunderstood. If I say, the road goes on for miles, that means the road goes on an indeterminate number of miles. The road goes on four miles. Even though 4 is not stressed, it will be taken to mean the quantity 4. The road goes on 4 miles. It will be misunderstood. Don't think that you can improve English by making your weak forms strong. Leave them weak. Another one, a particular problem with the word can. The positive of can is can, but the negative is can't. It doesn't get weak. Now, if you fail to weaken the positive, instead of saying I can see it, you say I can see it. I can see it. This will probably be misunderstood as the negative, just because it's strong. I can see it. Oh, can't you? Would be the response, but I can see it. Yes, so can I, is the answer. So don't make your weak form strong. You'll end up with misunderstandings, or difficulty at least in perception. There's a bit to know. Prepositions can't have their weak forms when they're at the end. We can't say, what are you looking for? We have to say, what are you looking for? It's got its strong vowel. It doesn't have to be stressed, but it has a strong vowel. I'm looking for the key with a schwa. The reason isn't hard to understand. Prepositions are weakened because they're attached to what they come before. And when there's nothing after them, there's nothing for them to be attached to, so they can't get weakened. You weaken them after you've stuck them on for something. Finally, I said I'd give you some practical advice about practicing rhythm. Well, by all means, learn some nursery rhymes and limericks and try to perform them rhythmically. I don't think it will do any harm. It's probably better to try and listen to lots of real examples of English speech and notice the rhythms it contains. Provided you know you're not going to find absolutely regular rhythm, just listening for rhythmic bits, and you'll gain a lot from doing that. As far as your own production goes, one way you can try is to build up sentences starting from the important words only, and only later putting in the less important words, such as the weak forms. So for instance, arrive, London, Tuesday. Arrive, London, Tuesday. Arrive, London, Tuesday. 3 stresses. Now, with that sort of rhythm in your mind, as if you were just mentioning the important words, can you now fit in the other words so that they don't spoil the rhythm? Arrive, London, Tuesday. I'm arriving in London on Tuesday. It seems to me that the main rhythm marked out by the important words is the same, even after I've expanded the sentence and put in the extra stuff. So a good way to practice may be to start by picking out the important words in this way. Invite all friends. Invite, stressed on the second syllable, all friends. I'm inviting all of my friends. Invite all friends, I'm inviting all of my friends. Not, I am inviting all of my... You've got to have that rhythm of the main words in your mind. Forgotten post letter. Forgotten post letter. I've forgotten to post your letter. I've forgotten to post your letter. You can do it both ways. You can either start building up a sentence from the main words and then fit in the less important thing. If you take a complete sentence, cross out the stuff that you know is not going to be important, not going to be stressed, practice the words that are left, and then put back the unstressed material. There are a few more examples at the bottom of your handout for you to try. Maybe you could try at least one. You see we have collect, suit, cleaners, collect, suit, cleaners, collect, suit, cleaners. Can you fit in some words that makes that into a meaningful sentence and say it with the same kind of rhythm that we have when we're just mentioning the three main words? Say it to your neighbour. Collect, suit, cleaners. I could say, I must collect my suit from the cleaners. I must collect, must is a weak form for must. Collect my, it's a strong vowel, but the word isn't stressed. I must collect my suit, and then from the two weak forms, from the cleaners. Okay, do you have any questions about the topics from today?